Hello, my friends. Lori Ashcraft here again. I'm your host for Viva La Evolution, which is produced by Recovery and Resilience Solutions, which is the training and consulting branch of Crestwood Behavioral Health. And I want to tell you a couple things that I've been forgetting to tell you. One is that we missed a week. So if you were looking for us last week, and I know I've gotten 2 or 3 calls, well, actually 4 or 5 calls from people saying, "Where were you last week?" Okay, so we had a little transition going on with our equipment. And so that's what happened. So we're back in business. We may be a little bit late this week because a key person is sick. But he's going to get well, so it's all going to be okay. So there's that. I wanted to tell you that. I keep forgetting to ask you to subscribe. So if you wouldn't mind, that would really help us out. It's just some kind of a podcast thing. I don't even really know about it. But anyway, that would help. So please do that. And now for our main event, which is amazing. We have Raul Almazar with us today. I can't tell you how grateful I am that we got a little bit of Raul's time for a podcast. He doesn't like me to say he's an expert, a nationally known expert in trauma-informed care. But I'm going to say it because to me, that's the truth. He knows more about trauma than anybody I know. And he explains it in such a heartwarming way that it just gets right in past any defenses we might have or any babbling brain that might be going on. I just love the whole idea of trauma-informed care. It gets to that point of, it's not what's wrong with you, because that's where a lot of contact starts with people. Like, what's wrong with you? What's your diagnosis? What'd you do? It's what happened to you. That's kind of an underlying question. It changes when we talk about trauma-informed care. And Raul just does a beautiful job with this. So without me babbling on anymore, let's hear what Raul has to say. Here we go. Okay, well, here we are, Raul. I'm so happy you were able to join us. I've been really looking forward to it. I just see you as such an amazing expert in the area of trauma-informed care. And I mean, you're much more than that. I know you have all kinds of other experiences, but I'm learned so much from you in the trauma-informed care area.
Well, it's so good to see you, Lori. And, I've always talked about, especially in my journey in this field, how I have looked up to you and Jean. In terms of having paved the way for a lot of the things. But realistically, I tell people I'm not an expert. I think my my ability to work with trauma-informed care and impart trauma-informed care learning comes from having been doing this work for many years and having observed amazing practices people have developed under the rubric of trauma-informed care. And I think that's really more what I bring to this is the, I like to tell myself, tell people, I'm a repository of practices. The only problem I'm having lately is with getting older, the memory is getting worse. It's harder and harder to bring up the memories of those good practices.
Well, you do an absolutely amazing job at it. I would never know you were searching for anything. Yeah, so, well, how did you get interested in trauma-informed care? What was the impetus for that passion?
Let me see. Can I take you back a little further?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay. So let me tell you how I think it would explain a little bit of what I do. I'm a nurse by training. I think a lot of people know that. And after nursing, my parents said to me, "You're going to medical school." And I went through a 5-year nursing program. And I said, "Heck no, I'm done."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I said, "I will give you a concession. I will go into a master's program," which I did. I wanted to be an operating room nurse. But one of the requirements was to take a course on psychiatric and mental health.
Mm.
And
Mm.
you know, typical, I thought, hey, that'll be easy. I got into that. I had this instructor, a professor, who basically also got into the field because she had a special needs child.
Mm.
And so what she did was she went back for special education and she made a commitment that my child would be age appropriate developmentally.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I will make this happen. And she started a school.
Uh,
And I volunteered in that school. And that's how I got into this when I really understood the power of the brain, the power of the mind,
yeah.
and the power of being able to help people with mental health. And, so fast forward, I was CEO of the largest state hospital in Illinois, and we got a grant from the federal government to reduce the use of seclusion and restraints. And that's how I met Jean and you and all of the
Yeah.
wonderful people who
Yeah.
were ahead of the curve. And we were pretty successful, recognized by SAMHSA in terms of the grant. And one of the proud moments for me, one is we were able to reduce the length of time people stayed in seclusion and restraints by more than 90%, right?
Wow. Yeah.
The length of usage or the frequency of usage by more than 65%. And so we were pretty successful. But I think one of the uh, milestones for me was we had a project coordinator for the grant, and she came to visit and um, took a look at what we were doing, and she apparently went back to uh, SAMHSA and the grantors and said, "I'm not coming back. These people know what they're doing.
Yeah.
People can teach other people what they're doing." And um, in that process, pretty much the rubric of what we were doing fell under trauma-informed care,
Mhm. Mhm.
understanding trauma,
Yeah.
understanding the effect of our past experiences on the present,
Mhm.
and that for us to really be able to provide the best care to the people we serve is to also and the people who work in the field to always be able to look back and find the story.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
The people are not doing what they're doing for no reason,
Right. Yeah. I
and
think
are
often we hear the story of it's not, how does that go? It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
right,
Yeah. And um,
right, and so I mean, I can keep going. So that's how I really entered the field. So first of all, that's when I know you had Kevin Hochschorn on, and I'm with the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. They were um, holding the grant at that time for the seclusion of restraint and reduction of restraint and seclusion, which I got, and then eventually formed the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care that um, was also under SAMHSA. And that's at that point when I got asked more and more if I can help other places.
yeah.
And in the process is that the realization and the learning that the work we were doing is not about reducing seclusion and restraints. It's about a culture shift. And the culture shift is understanding the people we serve.
Yeah. I love that. So Raul, let me just um, uh, let's just try something. Let's, let's say that I'm in an inpatient unit and you take a look at my record
Mhm.
and you see a long chain of me coming into crisis centers, a bunch of medication, and you see that I've been diagnosed with something. It could be bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, some of the usuals. Um, and you take a look at my history and tell me how you would approach me um, to figure out if this is a true diagnosis or if in fact it's a long stream of traumatic experiences.
Right. Um, God, complicated question. So if um where I think where I would start is to pretty much ask you, how did you get here?
Ah, yeah,
What's your
okay.
journey?
Mhm.
Right. You know, and you know, one of the things that one of the hallmarks of trauma informed care, I tell people that is pretty much this a simplistic way of looking at it is that you practice with curiosity.
Mm, mm,
I start with the curiosity.
mm,
How did you get here? And I think that there are principles of trauma informed care that we teach, that I implement, that we have, and we can talk about those 6 principles. But one of the things that um, we developed those principles with SAMHSA, that's published. But I have always added a 7th principle.
mm.
So you practice with curiosity and humility.
Oh, yeah. Well, shouldn't we should do that anyway, shouldn't we? But
Right,
we
right,
never
right,
called that forward before.
right, right. So I think where I start with is those diagnoses, that your diagnosis have been arrived by people making conclusions
Yeah.
from what happened. And the but the reality is those are theories. Those are hypotheses that people develop. Some people call it conceptualization, some call it formulation, but there is this hypothesis based on how I understand your history and how you got here.
Mhm.
And the humility part for me is for us to be able to say, not that I need to fix you or for you to change your behavior. We may need to change your behavior. But for example, a lot of times where we run into issue is we've tried many things, we've tried many interventions, and it's not working, and we keep trying. And the first place where I ask people to go is maybe your theory is wrong.
Yes, yeah. So that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is you might walk in and look at my records, but you don't approach me from that point of view. You approach me, I mean, you don't, at that point, you're going, I don't care what's in your record, Lori. I'm
Right,
curious about who you are right now
right.
and what you think happened to you from your point of view.
And hear your story. I mean, I was just asked to do a consult on, you know, woman in an inpatient program, kept trying to elope, kept trying to elope, made sense. She has history of elopement, and so they've got this all kinds of interventions, you know, one-to-one, all kinds of stuff to prevent her from eloping, until someone sat down with her and found out that her trying to leave the unit had nothing to do with her history. Someone was quietly threatening her on the unit.
Oh,
Right? I mean,
basic information.
but don't assume
Yeah, yeah,
your theory is necessarily the right one.
yes, yeah. It's like I'm hearing I just oh gosh, this is sort of related. I hope I don't take us off track. But
Okay, this,
I just read an article. I can't remember the guy's name, but he talks about, are we wounded healers or are we wounded wounders?
oh wow, yeah,
Yeah, and I thought, wow, we need to reflect on that.
right,
Every
right.
time we approach somebody, we need to say, am
Mhm.
I going into this as a healer, or am
Right,
I bringing my own
right.
wounds into this in a way that's not going to be
Well,
helpful?
it's interesting. Probably about, I've been doing this work and journey for maybe 15 years. Maybe about 10 years ago, I actually used to do a class on healing the healers.
Oh, uh-huh.
It's
Huh.
it's it's exactly for that reason.
Huh.
You know,
Huh.
our own wounds. So the whole, it's really what okay, I'm gonna get into more of a l- lecture mode. So what I tell folks now is um we are now in the behavioral health field,
Mm.
right? So mental health are our thoughts and feelings. I mean, that's our mental health.
Yeah.
Behavioral health is how do our thoughts and feelings interact the way influence the way we interact with the environment,
Mhm.
influence our relationships, influence our behaviors. That's behavioral health, and that's what we're working on.
Yes,
It's
that's
not
a bigger
just
picture.
right, and that's why it's not just diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
And it's about all of these things, but the important part is when we say it's our cognitive thoughts that influence our the way we relate to the environment.
Mhm.
What How did our cognitive thoughts develop? They developed out of our experiences.
Mhm.
And that's the trauma informed care piece, is that you go back and understand the experience.
Mhm. And I don't know how this fits into the theory because I'm not near as versed on it as you are, but I would say that underneath that cognitive process, I just keep finding fear there. It's
Mhm.
like fear was the
Right,
platform
right,
that all that cognition got built on.
right. I mean, the experiences produce that fear.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
right. I mean, and so you begin to look at, okay, the issue of fear, but one of the issues also that, you know, for example, in trauma, one of the things I teach people now is we used to have the definition of trauma as the three E's. There's an event, there's an experience of that event
Mm.
that you may have found painful or uh, very difficult, but that stress, only when that experience has long-term effects does it become trauma.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So I help people understand that it's in this world also, trauma-informed care has taken hold, but people are also misusing
Oh,
the
talk about that. That
well,
sounds
I mean the whole, I mean, I've heard people on units say to a coworker they don't like, you're traumatizing me.
oh, okay. They
Right.
weaponize it.
Right. And it's weaponized, but it's also um, misused. It's the long-term effects. But in the process, we used to talk about the negative long-term effects of traumatic experiences. Now I talk about trauma as the long-term effects without the negative, because there are also adaptations
Yes, yes.
that come from that traumatic experience. So it's the effects, and some of those effects could bring about post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
So,
I was
right,
thinking
so
about
it's
that. So
umbrella of
glad you brought that up.
under trauma is that there are effects, and some are negative, some are painful, some are still bothersome, and some are adaptive.
I've read, Martin Seligman
Mhm.
writes a lot about post-traumatic growth. In fact, that's the first place I really ever started reading about it and just found it fascinating. And the
Mhm.
question he was asking, this was early on in his research, the question he was asking is, why is it that some people, I mean, some people could all have the same traumatic experience.
Right.
And some people just get stuck there. You see them 20 years later and they're telling the same story. I
Mhm.
mean, they're just locked in to that
Right.
experience. Most
Right.
people kind of get maybe a little bit away from that, varying degrees away from that. And it's not their main story anymore, but it's still obviously holding them back. And then
Right.
there's some people at the other end who seem to get stronger and smarter and more
Mhm.
able to move forward because of the way they framed that experience.
Right. Right. Do I know the answer? No. I mean, one is I think, and this I know the work that you do is we really when we talk about traumatic experiences, we also talk about resiliency factors.
Yeah.
Many people that have gone through, so you and I may have the same experience, but I have a very supportive family.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So that's why the effects may be very different, or
Yeah.
the long-term effects may be different because we also have resiliency factors in
Mhm.
terms of how we handle that. That's why, for example, if a program or organization calls on me for say something bad happened, and they'll say, okay, we need to process, we need to debrief. That's great. But one of the first things that I would ask them is to, can you bring your group together so that you go through the effect of this horrendous experience as a community?
Oh, that's so smart. That's that connection, isn't it?
That's your resiliency factor.
Yeah.
Bring it in so that you can process through the painful experience, and then it's not trauma because there's resiliency factor
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is brought in. So I think that's one answer. I
Mhm.
think there's also I think you hit it on the head. It's a cognitive framework in how you understand what happened. Right. I have a colleague who is a wonderful um, survivor, chaplain, social worker, now becoming a trauma specialist, but has a horrendous history of having been prostituted as a child,
Mhm.
support her mother's drug habit. Horrendous history. But when she tells her story, one of the things I told her that she really used her experience and rose above it, right? And was able to really use it. Her The one thing that I noticed in her story was that she never saw herself as a victim.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
That's how she went through all of that. So it's that cognitive understanding of what's happening to you
Mhm.
will dictate, again, that cognitive thinking will dictate the long-term effects.
Yes. Yes, I can see that. So I'm just going to kind of restate that so I make sure I get it. So if I'm going through life and I see myself at the effect of life,
Mhm.
life is happening to me and I don't have much say over it.
Right.
I could see myself as a victim in an extreme situation, or I could just be kind of normal and just not see myself as having self-efficacy or
Mhm.
the ability to manage things or have an impact. If I
So,
have
so oh, go ahead. No, finish.
Okay, so if I have a traumatic experience, that's likely to because I don't have that positive framework of seeing myself as a survivor, it's liable
Mhm.
to set me back significantly.
Mhm. Right.
But
Right.
if I'm more like your friend and I see myself as I've survived a lot of things, what's this? Then
Right.
I actually learn from the process.
Right. Well, I did an informal study. I mean, I've never published this since I've been in the trauma world, and um, they a foundation brought me back to the Philippines to do a little bit of the trauma work on human trafficking,
Mm-hmm.
and did a little bit of digging around in terms of, while I was there, in terms of domestic violence and other types of trauma. And because one of the things I was looking at was, it seemed like as a culture, there did not seem as much long-term sequelae of trauma in that culture,
Mm-hmm.
compared to what I see in the Western
Yeah,
media.
interesting. Yeah.
And my conclusion, I mean, I wouldn't say this is scientific study, but my conclusion was, and from what I heard from a lot of people, because it is a highly religious society, a lot of people in their experience would say maybe this was God's will.
Yes. Yes.
And I think in the process, is that those folks are not assuming responsibility for what happened to them. So there's a lot less guilt, a lot less
Yes.
shame,
Yes. Yes.
versus our Western culture that says you are responsible for your fate.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and so I think that's why uh, I think we carry a bit more of the long-term effects of our traumatic experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just within myself, um, I operate from a spirit. I'm just going to call it a spiritual framework. Um, I had my first spiritual experience when I was 4, and it's just been a constant in my life, my whole life, and a natural thing. If I don't know what to do, or I or something's happened to me and I don't, that's
Mhm,
unpleasant, my
mhm,
first go-to is a spiritual framework. Like,
mhm.
this must be happening to me because I need to learn something from it.
Right.
Um, Now, we can debate the truth of that all day, but for me, it's true. That's how I hold it.
Right.
Um, and it's gotten me through all kinds of really uh, crazy, awful stuff.
Mhm, mhm. Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's your resilience.
Yeah, that's
That's your
my main go-to. And then, of course, having friends and family that support me. And I would say, if you have a job where you feel like you're making a difference, or you're doing something that has meaning, and you feel like you have purpose. I mean, even if it's, I mean, I think it's works best if it's in an area that you've been wounded in,
right.
because then that brings forward the passion. But even if it's like you're managing, or maybe you're just flipping burgers, but
Mhm.
you believe that you have your friends there, you're working together, your boss loves you, um, even that kind of job
Mhm.
can. That's why I have such a strong belief in employment for as a
Well,
rehabilitation
right.
process.
Well, and part of, I mean, I every year Dreamcatchers asks me to be their mental health week speaker, and that's one of the things that we really talk about is the importance of employment, but also um, being able to help people connect what might be the reasons from the past why they have difficulty with employment.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Right. I mean, I mean that's why to me the whole trauma informed care is just a framework. It's really establishing relationships and connection. And so, I mean, I tell people all the time, when we say relationship heals, relationship is not just about people. Relationship is about what's the relationship of what I'm doing now to my experiences.
oh wow, I hadn't thought of that.
There's what and so facetiously I would always say, why do you think when we go to therapy, our therapist keeps asking about our past
Yeah.
because maybe we will there we will find the connection between the past and what's happening now. And
Mhm.
it's even better if we make it ourselves, not the
Yes.
therapist, right?
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
but it's all about that relationship.
Mhm.
How do
Mhm.
we did a trauma training, Joan and I, with Nashville. Um, we did a trauma training in Alabama at the Tatweiler Women's Prison, 500 women,
Mm. Mm.
um, bunk beds, big
Mm.
cells,
Mhm.
on top of each other. The trauma for me was that it was in August in this with no air conditioning, but that's a different story.
Oh,
But
I know what you mean. And the humidity was awful, probably.
exactly, exactly. But we just taught people about trauma, the ACE study, and that. And the most common response we got from the women was, no one ever explained this to me.
Right.
Now I understand why I can't get clean. Now
Yes.
I understand why I keep going back to the same bad relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Um,
when we are able to form that relationship and that connection, that's where the healing
yeah.
starts.
Yeah. So I mean, I've seen you make a big difference for people in like a 1 or 2 hour training. Um, people come out of the room, they just look different. And these are usually kind of new staff or folks that haven't given it much thought. And they've been trained to look at what's wrong with people and name it and
Right.
then medicate it. I mean, that's been the training. I'm
Right.
simplifying that to a point of being very unfair, but that's the basic. And then they
Mhm.
hear you and they feel better about themselves and about their work and about the
Mhm.
people they're working with.
Right.
It's
Right.
just,
Because trauma in okay, so here's um um I'm gonna get into my theoretical mode. One of the principles of trauma-informed care is collaboration and mutuality, right? The leveling of power. So one of the things that I think the trauma-informed care training does is that it helps people see that the people that they're serving are the same as they are.
yes. Yeah, it's a
We
level.
are the same, right? It's a level of the playing field. So when we trained law enforcement officers, and I have a law enforcement officer that would say to me, learning this makes me a better law enforcement officer, but it also makes me a better husband. I'm
Huh.
like, explain your. And he was actually telling this to Joan. He said, my wife is a hoarder. Every time I come home, there are more stuff in the house. And all that happens is we fight
Yeah. Yeah.
because of what's happening. By learning this, he said, I now understand she grew up in foster care.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand this is what makes her feel safe.
Yeah.
That's the aha moment I think that people feel
Mhm.
when they learn this, which is, wow, this makes sense.
Mhm. Once you understand something like that, it's even though it's about someone else, it changes you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that has been, I mean, I'm ready. I should be retired by now, but I cannot. I mean, that's I think the gratification I get from this work is
Yeah.
all those times after meeting with people that people just come up and say, wow,
Yeah. Yeah.
how I see life
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
has changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I know has been really helpful in terms of learning about trauma and trauma-informed approaches and a trauma-informed way of looking at things is people's ability to really say this applies to my every day.
Yeah.
This is not a clinical approach.
Isn't that interesting that all of us
Mhm.
never came to understand life this way?
Right,
It's all
right,
kind of got judged completely differently, and
right,
you have
right.
to unlearn all that.
Yeah, and for many clinicians, one of the other things that I have found that happen is that many clinicians over time, legitimately, we become numb,
Yes, yes.
right? And one of the things I found is learning about this or relearning about this in a lot of ways revives empathy.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen that too. I've
Right,
seen.
right. I mean, it's just amazing how uh, people. I mean, I mean, this is not about me as a trainer, but these are some of the things I hear. That people come up to me. I had a social worker in a state hospital come up to me. I am getting ready for retirement. If this place really is going to do what we learned, I'll stay for 2 more years.
Wow. Yeah.
I want to see
Yeah.
this is what the work is about.
Yes. Yes. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
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 I'm sort of glad we didn't talk about this in the beginning because now with this beautiful backdrop you've created, what about just saying a little bit about the 6 principles?
Okay.
I think it'll
So,
make more sense now than just rattling it off in the beginning.
well, let me um I'll frame this under the trauma umbrella.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
But it can be expanded. Part of the reason I think the principles are effective if you really try and implement it. One of the things I teach folks is that organizations. So I'm talking about organizations. I'm not just talking about um, people's lives because I teach this in or teach organizations. Is organizations, especially psychiatric systems, um, but also generally in life, people with significant trauma have 3 universal triggers that are very common to all of us, actually, not just people with those. But it's the feeling of lack of control.
Yeah.
It's power differential when someone has power over me.
Mhm.
And it's the lack of predictability
Hmm.
if I don't know what's going to happen. Pretty universal.
And sometimes all 3 of those show up together.
Exactly, right? And I view the principles not just as good practice, but in a lot of ways, they are the countermeasures to the triggers. So, for
Okay.
example,
Okay, I'm
so
with
for
you.
example, if one of the big triggers in programs in places where we try and help people is the feeling of lack of control, one of the principles is empowerment, voice, and choice.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
It makes sense, but
Yeah.
it's also it's not just good practice, it also counteracts
Yes. The 3.
because what I'm doing is I'm trying to lessen the triggers
Mhm,
in the
mhm.
program
Yeah. Yeah.
by doing that, right? I already said this by practicing collaboration and mutuality.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm dealing with power differentials,
Yes. Yes.
right? So um, one of the big ones for me is safety, right? I mean, that underpins when you're talking about mental health systems, behavioral health systems, it underpins everything we do. But it's physical and psychological safety of the people we serve as well as the staff.
Mhm, mhm.
That alone, if people can work on that, that is one of the biggest things that can turn around
Yeah.
systems.
I
So, a good example is I will suggest to people you you do an admission assessment, right? What if one of your questions during your assessment as someone is coming in, what can make you feel safe here?
Yeah.
That's foundational.
Yes.
After a bad incident in a program, the need for someone to come in very quickly to help the people involved, both the people served as well as the staff, to simply be able to immediately go and ask, what do you need to feel safe again?
What a great question. And I've noticed is even if it's not incident related, I mean, if the person brings so much fear in with them, um,
Right.
they can't begin a recovery process until they feel safe. They're
So
just stuck.
I'll digress for that a little bit. I'm doing a talk on um, organizational wellness as it relates to recruitment and retention
Mm.
of workforce development. And one of the things I've been researching on are the criteria that most places use to evaluate what the best employers, right? I mean, they send out all those surveys. Number 3 in the criteria is physical and psychological well-being.
Huh. Huh.
I mean, that's how important that is
Yes.
um, um, uh, in the workforce, not just for the people we serve, but for the
Oh,
workforce.
absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so safety, lots and lots of work around safety. I'd always tell people, when you're working on this, don't confuse security with safety.
Mhm.
A secure place does not mean
Mhm.
place,
Mhm.
right? Um, there's trustworthiness and transparency. And how I really explain that to people is one of the ways we feel psychologically safe is if we can understand and make meaning of what's happening around us,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Being able to do that. So the reason why it's important to have transparency is because that people have the information to make meaning out of what's happening around them.
Yes. Yes.
And so that promotes that psychological safety. I mean, as like when I do a lot of organizational wellness work, many of the staff would say, I don't need to know, I don't need to agree with the decision you made. I just want to know why.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's because that will make me feel more psychologically safe.
Yes.
And did I do that? Well, the fourth, one of the most important ones is peer support.
Yes. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's a principle of trauma-informed approaches, but we also talk about peer support, not just for the people we serve, but for the staff
Mhm.
or the people who work there. What is peer support? Um, so for example, one of the things I would work with organizations with is um, something happened, psychiatric hospital, something happened,
Yeah. An
right?
event of some sort.
An event of some sort that affected say a person or a number of people. It's a 24-hour operation, right? It happened at 10 p.m. How that person gets support in the system most likely is, if you're really bothered by this, we have EAP.
Mhm. Yeah. Which may take a while to get into.
Not only take a while to get into, if you're so unlucky that it happened at 10 p.m. on a Friday, you're
Oh,
not going to
right.
get anyone,
Yeah.
right? So what I say to folks is, think about this in terms of organizational function. You're running a 24-hour operation. Is there peer support
Yeah. Yeah.
in the 24-hour operation? I was just working with a state hospital this week around this, and in my program, the way we developed it was we identified peer supporters. Staff identified people that they think can be good peer supporters on every shift in the hospital
Ah,
that someone to call, not management, because
yeah,
a lot of times people don't really want to talk to management about
right,
what's
right.
um, and in the assignment sheets on the units, they have named, they know who are the peer supporters who are working on that shift.
Okay, so they've got go-to people for
They've got
peace.
go-to people. So that's trauma informed. That's how we practice trauma informed approaches. And lastly, obviously, cultural, historical, and gender issues are specifically addressed. And the piece around those issues that I think is so important now that there's been an increased awareness that more and more organizations are working on diversity, equity, and all of that. But one of the issues that I also ask people to think about is that when we talk about dominant culture and power issues around dominant cultures, that may also be you may have a dominant culture of minorities,
Yes, yes.
and to pay attention to that. It's not just because I now have a diverse workforce with a lot more people. You may have a dominant culture that is um, exercising power in a way that's not helpful.
Right, yes.
You know, the example I've been telling people is there was a lawsuit filed in Ohio against the largest provider of LGBTQ services for discrimination against Black people.
Hmm, hmm.
Right? I mean, it's paying attention to
What
this.
an interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Great. Well,
So
Raul, thank
okay,
you.
those are the principles.
Okay. Uh, I I accidentally cut you off there. I'm sorry.
Uh,
Thank you so much. I always learn so much when I listen to you. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh,
And
thank you for, thank you for the platform. I mean, I mean, how much I love talking about this. And, and really, I mean, one of the things, for example, right now with Nashpit, we hold a lot of grants from SAMHSA.
yeah,
And one of the things that I love what SAMHSA's done is that they have created this grant under the mental health block grant of state technical assistance, where basically a state can ask for help in anything
yeah.
that
You
will improve the service system, and they can get a grant for consultants and advisors to come for free.
you told me about this. I knew about it for a long time, but I'd kind of forgotten about it till you told me about it. And at the time, you told me, I'm just going to tell on California, that California doesn't apply for any of them.
No, well,
Not with us.
I think partly because California has a lot of money, I think that they don't necessarily feel the need for additional funding. I mean, we have other grants that California is not a part of. Now, I'm not faulting California. I'm sure they're doing their work, but um, like we have a transfer initiative, so that is uh, not a big grant, but it's a grant to create creative solutions.
Oh, I love that idea.
Oh yeah, I mean we have we have great projects right now that states have come up with, especially around the crisis system, the
Mhm.
988, the crisis stabilization units. Um, out of those grants, some people are, for example, developing a way maybe that looking at if you call 988 for a mental health emergency, some are looking at press 3 if you're a veteran.
Hmm.
So they're creating this system for specific populations. That's what they use the money for, coming up with creative
Yeah.
things. Yeah,
Well, has always been wonderful listening to you, Raul. I always learn so much from you.
thank you.
Um,
It's great spending time with you, and I hope people feel that they learned something, but also feel free to reach out to if they want further conversations about this. Be happy to be
okay.
a resource.
I could put your email on the screen if you want.
Yep,
That work? Okay.
sure. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'll put them both up.
Yep.
And
Thank you.
and thank you for being available to people that way. That's very sweet of you.
Now, it's as our work in Nashpit is that we serve the mental health systems of the whole nation,
Yeah,
commissioners of mental health and substance use, and the territory. So that's our that's our function.
great. Well, thank you so much again.
Lori.
It's just been wonderful spending time with
Okay. Say
you.
hi to Jean.
I will. I will.
Take care.
Well, I told you, wasn't that amazing? We're going to have Raul back as often as we can talk him into it because uh, he's a strong supporter of peer support services. And in the near future, I'm going to do a special on peer support services and hear from a variety of different voices that support the process. And Raul's going to be a key person in all of that. So you can look forward to that. All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day and take care, and we'll see you soon.